Good afternoon and welcome to Buildable Backyards. My name is Sherry Taylor and I'm the asset manager for Durham Community Land Trustees. I'm also going to be your host for the summit. We're so happy that all of you could join us. And we're just really excited about what this summit is going to help us do. This was really born out of a desire to learn more about ADUs and how nonprofits such as Durham Community Land Trustees could incorporate this into our work. I was looking for information. I was looking for, sources to lean on, and I couldn't necessarily find them. So we decided to host this summit so that we could learn as an organization and also provide all of these resources to you. We are so happy that we have a lot of sponsors, and you're going to hear more about them throughout the summit, but we're very thankful for them. We're also thankful to our speakers. I've had the chance to get to know a lot of our speakers because we've spoken a lot over the past few months. Each one of them is volunteering their time to really share their expertise and share their thought leadership. They're concerned about not only affordable housing, but inclusive communities, and they really want to see people thrive. It doesn't always mean that they're thinking about the people in their local area, the people that they can touch. They're thinking about the whole country. And so we have speakers here from all over California and Oregon and Minnesota and Georgia and Ohio. And we just have a really good group because they're concerned. And so I'm very thankful for all of the speakers who have volunteered to be with us over the next 2 days. But before we get into the session, I just wanted to highlight a few things, a few housekeeping things. This is a webinar setup, so we won't be able to hear you. You won't be able to come off mute, but we encourage you to put your questions in the chat. All of the moderators will be checking that, and we'll have Q&A at the end of each session. We also encourage you to really utilize the Whova event platform to network during the breaks and after the day is done, or before the day starts tomorrow. Utilize this tool because it's really here for you. You can set up your own virtual meetups if you would like around topics that you're interested in, and start to connect with others who are really interested in this work. So I'd like you to do that. But first things first, I want to know what industry everyone is representing. So you're going to see a poll pop up on your screen. And if you could take that poll, we'll give you the results of that in a few minutes. But we have a wide-ranging group here, because we know it's more than just about design and development. It's also about, you know, all of the professionals that really touch the real estate industry. And that's why in this summit, you're going to hear from lenders, appraisers, designers, and others who really take part in each transaction. Now I want to introduce Selena Mack. She is the Executive Director of Durham Community Land Trustees, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about the organization and the work we do in Durham. Selena?
Thank you, Sherry. I wanted to make sure I was off mute. Okay. I too would like to welcome you to the Buildable Backyards Real Estate Summit 2021, as well as virtually to Durham, North Carolina. I'm assuming you can see my screen. Located in central Piedmont area of the state, Durham is North Carolina's fourth largest city, with a population of approximately 288,000 people. Affectionately known as the Bull City, after its infamous brand of cigarettes during its tobacco production heyday. Also referred to as the City of Medicine for the medical advancements of Duke Medical Center in the Research Triangle Park, the largest and most prominent high-tech research and development park in the United States. Here are a few facts about where Durham is today with regards to housing. Most notably, that median rent for a 2-bedroom unit is over $1,400 a month. And that not only are median home sale prices over $300,000, but they've gone up over 12% in the last year. In the early to mid 1980s, following the decline of the tobacco and textile industries, Durham's Western neighborhoods found itself in a cycle of disinvestment. A lack of public and private investment, substandard and vacant housing, and as a result, increasing crime rates. It was in this environment that community residents banded together to demand changes in their neighborhood and created Durham Community Land Trustees in 1987. Our mission was to both stabilize and revitalize the community by renovating vacant and deteriorated housing stock, by increasing our home opportunities through the community land trust model, by also developing affordable rental opportunities, and thus creating an environment that would attract private investment. This strategy worked really well for about almost 30 years, for nearly 30 years, and DCLT developed well over 200 units of affordable housing in Durham's Western neighborhoods, and that's both rental and home ownership. Support for this period of development was primarily provided by the City of Durham through federal pass-throughs and local funding. NeighborWorks America, we became a chartered member in 2005, and by Duke University, where they created a land bank, which allowed us to develop, or the bank to develop or to hold over 100 parcels of property for development by one of Durham's nonprofit organizations. While it's disheartening to realize that you can no longer develop in your primary target neighborhood because of gentrification, it did present an opportunity to see just how effective the CLT model is in gentrifying neighborhoods. And we're very pleased with the results. Today, Durham's West End neighborhoods is a very diverse community that will never completely gentrify because of the work that DCLT did here. In 2016, we changed our mission statement to reflect our efforts to develop, manage, and advocate for permanently affordable housing instead of stabilizing and revitalizing the community, which was no longer a pressing need. We have expanded our target areas and now develop in 7 neighborhoods within Durham's urban core. We've developed over approximately 365 units, of which we actually self-manage 200 of those units. So why ADUs and why now? Like many nonprofit organizations, DCLT is challenged to find land anywhere in Durham. Not only is it terribly expensive, it's very competitive, often selling within days of going on the market, and usually above asking price and often for cash. Also, ADUs would actually also provide us an opportunity to utilize the land that we already own. They provide an opportunity, well, because of recent changes in the zoning laws, we now actually have some smaller setbacks and larger units. So we're actually able to develop units up to 800 square feet here in Durham now. And I think you saw in the earlier slide that the need has not been greater than it is now. That there's over 16,000 affordable housing units that are actually needed in Durham. And of the affordable housing that exist in Durham, over 50% of those are actually rent burden, which means that they're actually spending more than 30% of their household income on housing related expenses. So the time is right, and the time is now. And we are excited to host this summit and present this opportunity to learn more about how ADUs can help in these challenging times in affordable housing. So again, as Sherry mentioned, thank you so much for being here and being a part of this summit. And I will turn this back over to Sherry.
All right. Thank you, Selena. You could go to the next slide, please. That'd be great. So you should be seeing the results of the poll pretty soon. We have a very diverse attendee list here. Most of you are either nonprofits or nonprofit developers. We also have folks in appraisal, lending, design, development, a few in real estate, and a couple of students. So thank you all, for, like I said, for coming and joining us. We really do want to have this be a collaborative environment where we learn from each other. And you can also post any resources you have about ADUs on Whova. But we're going to start our first session now. It's called Small Homes at Home, ADUs for Neighborhood Change. And we have 2 awesome panelists today. June Grant, she is an architect and the founder and design principal at Blink Lab Architecture, which is a boutique research-based architecture and urban design studio. She launched Blink Lab in 2014, and it's based on her 20 years experience in architecture design and urban regeneration. Also on our panel today is Eli Spidak. He has been developing affordable housing communities in Oregon for 25 years. He started as a volunteer construction supervisor with Habitat for Humanity, but then launched Orange Spot LLC to build additional new models of community-oriented housing. He's built over 100 homes, typically in small clusters, and has included ADUs or accessory dwelling units in those. Eli was awarded the Loeb Fellowship in Advanced Environmental Studies at the Harvard GSD, and also he co-founded accessorydwellings.org, which is a great resource as well. Thank you both for joining us today for this summit. And now I'm going to hand it over to June.
Thank you, Sherry. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation, Sherry and the others who found me and reached out to give this presentation. For those who don't know, I am based in Oakland, California, and I'm going to present my story about in-law units from the perspective of the African-American community, a fifth generation resident in Oakland, and how her story really forced me to take a close look at affordable housing options, and also what are the barriers that are preventing African Americans from holding on to the land and assets that they currently have, and what units have an opportunity to do. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. I don't think I have any sound on here, but we'll just do that. Okay. So my slides are timed, so I'll stick to my 10 minutes. So I base my work always with a story because I'm particularly interested in the African-American experience. I'm originally from Jamaica, so I'm a migrant. I've lived in Manhattan, and then I moved to the Bay Area. Spent almost equal amount of years in both East and West, and I've been able to witness, understand a bit, and everything is really always learning something new about the African-American experience and culture. So this is one of my neighbors. My office is actually in the neighborhood. Annette Miller. Annette came to me one day and she said she wanted to build an in-law unit for herself. And she explained, she knew exactly what it meant in terms of revenue generation, asset ownership, fifth generation from the South. But what she explained was, in her community, where there used to be predominantly African-American, on her block, where there used to be 24 families, there are only now 5. And what she was experiencing was actually a sense of fear and insecurity for the first time in her life, where the neighborhood that she knew, that she grew up in, that she's known for generations, she was no longer feeling that she had a civic right to it. And she wanted to build in order to not just have another unit on a piece of land that her family owned, but to also kind of geographically cement and really establish a bigger presence on her block. There's a narrative out there that African Americans are not the solution providers for issues. And you see that in the narrative around wealth building, what's on the TV, the number of homelessness. But what is actually going on is many of us want to build a solution. We see the issues. We are not blind to it. And in the Bay Area, it may not be as bad in North Carolina, but in the Bay Area, we have a horrendous situation where we have humanity living on the street and the numbers are increasing. And the numbers are increasing not only because we have great income disparity, but also what happens once you hit 50, you typically have some major medical issue that suddenly you have a debt, that the only way to pay off that debt is to remortgage the house. And that is where many, not just African Americans in the Bay Area, but that is where many individuals are falling into that trap of having to sell or remortgage their home. And what is ending up is that they're losing the very asset that they had. So as an architect with an economics background, it hits me on many fronts. I'm very concerned about the humanity in the street. I recognize as an architect and an economic analyst, I can look at things from various perspectives. And one of the things I see as an architect we can do is start to ground truth some of these public proposals. Many times I see urban land use proposals that sound great. And what I take the time to do is quantify what is that physical implication of that proposal. And so that was my jump off point with the in-law units, was to look at, well, what is the capacity truly for African Americans to build in-law units? It's all well and good to pass the ordinance, but if the group that has always benefited and the group that has never benefited is not considered, then all we're doing is providing something that only those who have always benefited will benefit from. So as an architect, I take the time to ground truth solutions. So I look at how much space do we have? What is the real capacity at the back of the yard? What is the income generation of that piece of land? What is the income level of the homeowner? Because many times the families that own the home, their income is not that high. They've inherited that asset, but they themselves don't earn that much to be able to even maintain that original asset. So I look at that as that's part of the issue as well. And so what I decided to do was I needed to have like a focus group. So I found 3 families to work with me, where I started to look at what are the parcel sizes? How much income does each family have? What is a reasonable size in-law unit to design? Because what I saw in the market were great, beautiful in-law units, but they were large. And I knew that at $300,000 and $400,000, those are Bay Area dollars, most of my African-American homeowners would not be able to build these 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 in-law units. My job was to design an affordable unit that matched my market. So this diagram shows all the steps that I've been going through since 2017, where we've looked at parcels across the entire Oakland in various community groups. We've designed in-law units of various sizes to match footprint and income levels. Right now, in the process of creating a pre-approved set of drawings that homeowners can select the floor plan that they need. And I knew that this idea of providing these 3 models made sense because we have 65,000 single-family homes in the Bay Area, and almost all of them have a garage in the back that's filled with junk, that's filled with the Peloton that's not been used, the bicycle that has not been used, the basket, the table tennis, everything in this garage that really could be converted. And so what I did was not say we have to necessarily build brand new buildings, but can we augment, expand, convert these existing footprints so that we can make affordable housing options? And if we did, and this is what it looks like. This is just looking at all these red dots that you're seeing are accessory structures, garages, cabins in the backyards that could be converted, that are already between 250 square feet to 800 square feet. So I'm not proposing new buildings. I'm actually saying we have the physical capacity within Oakland to solve A, our homeless issue, but also B, wealth security, income generation, asset security, and the vulnerability around aging, which is a real important thing for us to consider. And so this is my way of ground truthing policy, because policy tends to be just words and they sound great, but if I can't fit it on a map and see how it's physically going to impact my people, because I'm less interested in those who will always be able to find someone to help them. And so this is the design, the basic components of the models that I took into consideration, which is, okay, I gotta make sure it's energy efficient and water efficient. I wanna make sure that it's kind of modular. So in the back of the unit, we have it in 3 sections. The back, the green box is what we call the wet box. So we put all the plumbing together, kitchen, bathroom, etc. Then there's the next box, which I call the dry box, which is the sleeping and TV. They just gang together. And then the last piece, the yellow box, actually it's not the last, second to last, what I call the smile box. It's the front porch. You're in the South, technically. I'm from the Caribbean. The veranda is where you meet. It is where you negotiate between the public space, a person walking on the street, to where you invite someone to have a sit down on a coffee or a drink. And then you have your private space, which is in the pink. It is critical, I think, to have an understanding about private space versus social spaces. And then the last piece of what we've integrated in our designs is these little vertical things you see here, actually growing vines. The idea is that this unit could also start to produce food. And the next part we considered was, a high low tech way of delivering the in-law units, where what I'm really promoting is a community build, where we have a labor shortage, right? I live by a train line, that's what you're hearing. Hope it goes by soon. There it goes. Where we have a shortage of labor, what I see is that we have community groups. If we can come together on backyard barbecuing, we can come together around putting some 2x4s together to make a wall and raise it together. So what I'm promoting this idea of, can we have an offsite fabrication site where we're making the walls, and then we bring the walls to the site, and as a community, we raise the walls. It is something I think we're going to have to bring back in terms of construction, because we're just lacking the labor right now. And then the last part is, I try to incentivize in-law units by doing the design catalog, because I know if I did one single design per client, they're going to have to pay me almost $30,000 just to design their in-law unit. So I might as well design 3 and then share that cost across all clients, rather than each client paying $30,000 each time. So I have 10 clients, 30,000 divided by 10, they're only paying 3,000 for a design versus 30,000. So that's how I incentivize in-law unit, is when a client approaches me, I then say, can we find 4 or 5 in your neighborhood? So we share the cost rather than that one individual building. It also allows me to say to communities, let's get together and 5 of you build an in-law unit rather than one person. So I want to end by saying that designing is all well and good, but what we are very clear about is that we have an unfair access to finance. And we all know you can't build it up money. I can design all I want. But if the banks and a financial pathway is not there, we can't build. And so it's absolutely critical for me to see more African-American faces in the housing finance conversations and alternative financial paths, because we know it's all well and good. We can give a lot of charity hours to raising the wall. I can give charity hours to designing on paper, but Home Depot does not accept charity when you want to buy some 2x4s. So I think this is my closing slide, where I really, my role here today is to really try and encourage as many African-American voices and faces in the in-law unit space, because what I'm really concerned about is that there's a big push around multi-unit housing. Let me stop sharing. There's a big push around multi-unit housing, but that's apartments. That does not build wealth. And so I'm going to end here and hand over to Eli, I think. Thanks, Sherry.
Thank you, June. Eli?
Thank you so much, June. That was wonderful. I am also on the West Coast. I'm going to share my screen here. Here we go. And I will mention that my first volunteer time at Habitat for Humanity was in Asheville, North Carolina. And then also building on the land trust movement, I was on the board of Portland's land trust, learning so much from what you've done in Durham for the first 5 years of our community-based organization here in Portland. And I want to, I admit I've come from Washington, D.C., so I might speak quickly. So just raise your hand if I go too fast. But I'd love to give a little bit of an orientation to ADUs, and then work around to what June was talking about, is what some financing options are to make them more affordable to people who otherwise have been shut out of that option. So we'll go over what communities are doing to re-legalize accessory dwellings, what the levers of change are if you're in a community that doesn't allow them right now and you want to allow them, how that team comes together. And then get real about, it's not just the regulations, there's other factors that impede people from creating ADUs. And lastly, how to make them affordable. So first of all, almost everywhere in the country, there's some example of an ADU by different names. So here are some examples from all over the place. It's just a traditional kind of housing we've been creating in our country since for hundreds and hundreds of years. And definitionally, it's just a small dwelling on the same lot as a primary home with its own kitchen and sleeping quarters and bathroom. It's not a detached bedroom. We've got a few of these examples in Portland and other cities where it's a lovely little cottage in the backyard, but it's got no kitchen in it. So it wouldn't be called an accessory dwelling unit. And as much as I love tiny homes, I've got a couple of them, it's not a tiny home either, because tiny homes are on wheels, they're portable. Some cities are legalizing them alongside ADUs, but I'm not going to focus on that for this chat. But here are some examples of real ones from neighborhoods across the country where people have converted backyard structures or built new ones or converted part of their main house into a small dwelling unit. And the reason cities are legalizing ADUs, or re-legalizing them, as I should say, is that they're familiar. I mean, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and all the alleys were lined by row houses. And that's where lower income folks lived. And they had communities bustling along the alleys until they were systematically removed to create garages and backyards. But every part of the country has some example of that. And as June was saying, there's a lack of housing choice. If you want to live in a small apartment, your only choice might be a large apartment building, because in the neighborhoods, the residential neighborhoods, you've got large homes on large lots, and there's no small place to rent. We talk about middle housing as an area where you focus just on the small end between production built single family homes and 4+ story apartment buildings. We're trying to figure out how to recreate smaller housing options in neighborhoods. People also like ADUs because they are flexible over time. It might start off that a family rents out the ADU for supplemental income. Then maybe the family grows and they take over the ADU. I know some friends who it became the schoolhouse during COVID, or it became where a parent lived who was isolating from the rest of the family who worked in the medical profession. And then maybe a couple downsizes into an ADU and rents out the main house when they don't need or can't afford to take care of that much space. They work great for multi-generational housing. We see that a lot in the immigrant community, where you have extended families who just want to have an additional kitchen in a separate dwelling unit. And then households are just getting smaller. This is Oregon data, but it's consistent around the country, where in 1960, 53% of households had 3 or more people in them. And then if you go to 1970, 1980, that's the green bar, it's getting smaller and smaller. 90, 2000, 2010, almost 2/3 of households are 1 or 2 people right now. And yet our average housing size has gone up to 2,500 square feet. We're getting a lot bigger, a lot more clutter, and a lot more space per person, which has environmental implications. And I, like with June, work with AARP a lot, and isolation is a huge issue for our older relatives. It's isolation and loneliness are worse than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And people are struggling, and they want to have community around them. Environmental benefits is what got me originally interested in accessory dwellings, because almost all of our heating and cooling, the carbon footprint of our house scales directly with how large that house is. ADUs are naturally, they're smaller. And affordable housing, even without regulated affordable housing that the land trust movement could bring to accessory dwellings, they're naturally affordable because almost 15 or 20% of ADUs are made available for free to someone, a friend or family, who otherwise would be out there competing on the housing market. So that's that big bar on the left side of this graph. People don't always rent out ADUs to maximize their income. A lot of times they don't. They're a great niche for small and emerging architects and contractors. I can't tell you how many small builders got going building accessory dwellings in town. And also, if you're going to change your zoning, and I see Durham already has a pretty good set of codes for accessory dwellings, they're discreet, they're politically palatable. People can put up with them in the neighborhood where they might object to more intense forms of housing. In some parts of California, where they're legalized ADUs statewide, they allow their property rights advocates say, well, why can't I just take a portion of my 5-bedroom house to put a little door on it and let someone rent it out? And lastly, people can age in place. It's a great way, someone who knows and loves the neighborhood, but they don't want to leave it, but they can't afford a full-size home. It's a way to stay in town. A lot of action has happened on ADUs lately. In Oregon, Washington, New Hampshire, California, Vermont just updated their rules in Washington, D.C. I'm going to put that as a state here because I'm from D.C. ADUs are allowed by right throughout the state. And there's regional initiatives going on as well. And increasingly, communities are allowing 2 ADUs on a lot, one inside the main house and a detached one. So from the street, it just looks like a house with a detached garage, but really there's 3 dwellings there. The entire state of California is basically a trifecta state. Oregon is similar in that regard. And now, if you're in a community that has ADU codes, it's probably going to fit into, I'm putting these images up because Fawn's, of course, one of the most famous ADU residents, and Oscar as well. I'm not much of a rule follower. But most communities have ADUs in one of these categories. Either only pre-existing ADUs are allowed. This is the case for Chicago, for example. They have thousands of coach units, but they can only continue using them as residences if they've been continuously occupied. And if they don't, then you can't live in them anymore. Then you've also got some cities where back in 2000, 20 years ago, they legalized ADUs, but they wrote the rules so strictly that no one ever actually builds them. So you have these codes on the books that have never been used. And then you've also got more recent codes where you can allow ADUs pretty easily. And those are the cities where they're starting to take off. And the challenge with the regulatory side is to write a code that responds to local concerns about traffic and density and actually gets used too, which is that's the challenge. Because sometimes you write a code so strictly, it can only be like Butler housing or something like that. And there are actually codes on the books that still say that, believe it or not. They never get used. So the ingredients of a good ADU code, and Durham's got a pretty good one right now. First is just to define what zones of the city are they allowed in, what lot sizes. Some cities, and I can say this from working in Philadelphia and Chicago lately, there's a lot of political pressure to keep ADUs out of certain parts of the city. And it's really worth looking at that. Is the real intent of it because of the neighborhood character, or is the real intent to make sure there's no inexpensive housing available in that set of the neighborhood to keep low-income people out? So that's something, a concern with sort of geographic-based rules. And then how they get created. Oftentimes it can be an addition, converting an existing house or new construction. Or if you have a small house on the lot, sometimes you can make that the ADU of the new house you're going to build on the lot. Since lots vary a lot, it's helpful to have flexible ways you can create an ADU, because some lots are just no way to build another structure on the lot, but you could convert the downstairs. This is in row house neighborhoods, for example. And then allow it to build by right versus some discretionary process. The easiest ADU code to write is one where you just say ADU subject to approval of the planning commissioner, which sounds great. It's short, but that relies on perseverance and luck of the draw to see whether you can actually get the permit for the thing. Clear and objective standards are very helpful. And then how many? Usually one, sometimes two are allowed. And then we also go to what they're allowed to be used for. Some communities say you can only use them for owner-occupied properties. That's rare. Unfortunately, that helps decrease people's financing option for ADUs. But there also sometimes they have rules on short-term rentals or home-based businesses. And then what they look like. And this has to do with what's going to fit in with the neighborhood, because you've got to get through a political process to get these codes adopted. 800 square feet to 1,200 square feet is pretty common. Usually 1.5 stories is typical for single family structures. Parking, a lot of times if you require an off-street parking space, you just can't build the ADU. I think in San Francisco, they used to require off-street parking for ADUs, and it was physically impossible to put a space there. So some communities get creative about this and they say, well, you have to have one space of parking, but you can count frontage of the property that doesn't have a curb cut to meet your parking minimum. And then you don't really have to build additional parking, but you're not likely to spill over parking to neighbors. The appearance of an ADU, sometimes you have to match the existing house in some ways, but sometimes the existing house is incredibly ugly. So you have an alternate path where you just have maybe some design that fits in with the neighborhood. And in Portland, that might be lap siding or a pitched roof. And then sometimes the communities want it to look like a single family house, so they say the entry stair has to be on the side. And then the last rule is if it's a detached accessory dwelling unit, usually communities follow what they require for garages. So they make it located sort of on the back of the lot or in the corner. There's some setbacks, so it doesn't feel like it's an additional structure on the lot. And there's some great guidance on this if you're in a community where you don't allow ADUs yet, but your codes are hard to navigate. This is ABCs of ADUs that I worked with AERP to generate, and they now have a more substantial guide for city codes and also state regulations, which is increasingly where the code change is happening for ADUs. If you're looking at state level rules, these are some of the states which have in the past 4 or 5 years have adopted legislation to allow ADUs statewide. I don't think that North Carolina is on this list yet. I'm not sure that would happen, but sometimes that makes it more efficient for small cities. They don't have to do all the work themselves. So the political strategy to get these things passed has to do with pulling together this wide coalition of folks. Affordable housing groups are key, AERP, small contractors and architects. I'm not going to list all these folks out, but home builders and realtors also have been supportive of laws to allow ADUs. And that's the coalition that sort of comes together along with inside folks. So a lot of times on a city council, you might have someone who's in the real life. In Portland, we had a fire chief who was tired of seeing these illegal, unsafe secondary dwellings and knew that if people had to go through, if it was easier to legalize them, they would, and they'd replace that smoke detector or provide the egress window. We also have a woman on city council now who, or until recently, who had a son who's teenager, confined to a wheelchair, and she knew that he was going to be able to live mostly independent, but not entirely independently. And having the option of a converted garage to an accessory dwelling unit with no step entry would allow him to live nearby and get the support. And she was an incredible proponent to legalize ADUs in Portland, where I live. And then single family zoning. I mean, our cities are plastered with a lot of single family zoning, and it's for a specific reason sometimes, which is to keep low income people out. And unfortunately, that's some of our history of our cities. And I serve on the planning commission of Portland. We have to deal with the legacy of that unfortunate use of the power of zoning. And ADUs are a way of pushing back against that, to say that in every neighborhood, it should be possible to create a small, less expensive housing unit. Portland, where I live, 44% of the city is zoned single family. That's the yellow on the map. Most cities are similar to this. And by allowing additional units, we can have less expensive housing choices anywhere, even in the affluent neighborhoods. As June said, sharing the stories is critical. I mean, we've got a woman, Lisa, who looked for a property so her 92-year-old mom could live on the same lot as her, but there was no way they were ever going to share a kitchen. And she built it, and that's where mom lives today. We got Carrie and Sterling. They've been in the neighborhood forever in Santa Cruz, and longstanding residents. And they work with Habitat for Humanity to build an accessory dwelling where their daughter Brenda could live. And that she was also having a hard time with her housing costs. So they could share their housing costs in the same lot. And eventually they might switch places. So Brenda could move into the main house while Carrie and Sterling downsize to the ADU. This is another community in Portland where Dan and Nancy's an architect. They built an ADU. It was a long-term rental for them, but then the tenants moved out. And in the same neighborhood, which is a very gentrifying neighborhood, an apartment complex, the rent, it was acquired and the rents doubled and everybody was displaced, including many community members from Mexico who have kids in local school, the same school that my kids go to. They said, hey, our ADU is available. And one of the residents who was displaced moved in, and she's still living there today with her family. So they become sort of a safety net housing option. And if a community is allowing ADUs and there's incredible public pushback against some portion of it, it's worth just taking a breath and saying compromise is okay. Maybe we will have a restriction on owner occupancy, or maybe we'll only have a portion of the city, because I know, and many people in the movement know, that 5 years later, they're going to get rid of that restriction because people aren't going to care about it anymore. So legalizing ADUs is the first step, but actually helping people build them is the next thing, because who builds ADUs? It's amateurs. I mean, of all the housing we built in our country, single family homes are built in large subdivisions by professional developers. 4+ story apartment buildings are built by professional developers. ADUs are built by people who usually don't know what they're doing. And we have to acknowledge that and say, let's help them out. Because these are real folks who maybe did a kitchen remodel, maybe nothing more. And we also have to be real about where they're going to get built. If you're in a community like Durham where your rents are $1,500, that's enough to pay the additional debt on a loan, a home equity line of credit or something like that to build an ADU, if you have that option. But if you're in a more rural area or rents are lower, then you'll still get some ADUs built for lifestyle reasons, you know, to care for a loved one or relative. But the economic driver is not going to be there, so you won't see quite as many. Because to build an ADU, you've got to deal with regulation. You probably many people have never gotten a permit before or hired an architect before. They might have to tell their neighbors about it, which is uncomfortable to do. They have to climb the learning curve. It's not just zoning, but it's building codes as well. ADUs aren't cheap. And as June pointed out, they can be $300,000 plus. I mean, luckily, there are some folks building modular, inexpensive ADUs in $100,000, $120,000 range. But those are the exception, not the rule right now. Cash and home equity lines of credit. I know you have a seminar coming up on financing options for ADUs, but there aren't very good choices out there right now. We're still working on that. It's inefficient to build them. I'm a home builder, and in building a small house in the backyard of an existing house is not an efficient way to build compared to other types of construction. And not everyone wants to be a landlord. So some of the things we do to help communities actually use the rules once they're written, one of them is to have guides, just like things you can download from the internet, just saying these are the rules to build an ADU in your community. They're always different, so it's good to have those locally available. Sometimes people do tours of accessory dwellings, because if you got the idea spinning around your head to build one, actually seeing inside one can turn that wheel spinning into action. And sometimes there's trainings. I mean, real estate agents, as one example from this list, They're always talking to each other, and that's the point of contact when people buy and sell homes. And they need to understand the rules for accessory dwelling units so they can communicate it to their clients. Stories in the media. Once you've gotten the political process through to adopt rules, this is what gets people excited about. People love reading stories about accessory dwellings or tiny homes. It inspires them to take action. And then there's resources. This is one publication that June worked on with AARP, the step-by-step guide to design and development. And there's some other resources as well. And then lastly, I'm going to close with how to make ADUs more affordable, because this is the challenge. You've got people building ADUs who tend to have enough affluence to own the property and enough income to build a house. If they're going to make it, that's probably going to be a white person who's pretty well off. And the odds are pretty good that if they're going to make it available to a friend or family, that other person might be pretty well off too. So how do you break that cycle? One of the ideas is to provide loans for people building ADUs that are special lower terms for people with at 80% of median family income. If you rent it to someone at 80% of median family income, you can get a sweet loan, 3.5% interest for 20 years. So that's one strategy, is to get a loan product that's designed for an ADU resident. Oopsie. Another is, and this is out of Silicon Valley in California, is to provide up to $200,000 loan with a 2-year commitment to affordability. So this is sort of helping someone who already owns a home who might not otherwise be able to afford a full size, might not have enough income to get a market rate loan. They can get a loan to build an ADU as long as they rent it to someone who income qualifies. And then the other approach is to separate the ownership, to use condominium model so you can sell the home separately from the ADU. And I've done this a couple times. One where in a neighborhood, I have 2 houses side by side, each with an ADU. The home sold for $350,000. The ADU sold for about $110,000. This is over a decade ago. 10 years later, the homes in the front sell for about $600,000. They've doubled in price, and the ADUs in the back have sold for $200,000. So they're still expensive, but they're much less expensive. They're a third the price of any other house in the neighborhood. And this is without any public subsidy. If you bring in a land trust, then you can get more affordability on the back homes. This is another project where I did something similar, where you have an old farmhouse and built in a separate accessory dwelling unit on the property, and they sold for 1/3, 2/3 pricing. And I know that with the land trust model, you've got an opportunity there to, if you have a series of lots or you have lots with existing homes on them, you could use a land lease model to make the land trust the owner of the land underneath both properties, and then sell the house and the ADU to separate owners, either as a condominium or as a separate land leases. So I'm going to leave it at that and stop sharing screens.
All right, thank you so much, Eli. That was a great presentation and primer on ADUs, what they are, the policy implications, and how difficult or easy they could be to construct. So before we get into the Q&A, I just wanted to ask both June and Eli, what do you think is the greatest opportunity for ADUs? I know we talked maybe a week or so ago about all of this, and we had a great conversation about where you think this is going as far as nationally and addressing the housing crisis. So can you tell us what you think the greatest benefit of ADUs are?
I guess I can go first. Of course, it's for me, it's 2 things. It's cultural conservation as well as family security and stability. So it's a 2-prong. It's for me, that's where I think the urgency nationally, we are finally reckoning that income instability is on the rise, and in-law units are a way to bring stable income back to a family. And then also, there is also a recognition that communities have been fragmented. And I see that we are having that conversation about communities coming back together. More cities, through working with ULI, the Urban Land Institute, but not just cities, but rural communities are actually having the same conversation about what is that strategy, what is that land use and housing strategy that's gonna maintain and improve that community. So I think it's a trend that's gonna spread, especially the fact that it's low entry skills to construct, depending on how high you're going. That's going to be the main driver, is the fact that as long as you're able and can swing a hammer, you'll be able to do this. So it doesn't require any kind of professional skill sets to build. So I'm hoping that kind of like the Victory Garden phenomenon that happened during World War I and II, that we are actually at that point again where we have to look back at community and say, how are we going to do this ourselves?
I would say we love our neighborhoods so much in America, and we have built them at such low densities that we're having trouble. And I think that ADUs are a way to continue to love our neighborhoods, but let more people live in them, and at a wider range of incomes. So I think it's a way of addressing the exclusivity with which development has happened in our country for the past 50, 60 years, and let people stay in the neighborhoods that they treasure, even as households are smaller. We have some neighborhoods in Portland where they're the oldest, most established neighborhoods with big homes, and the population density in the neighborhood has been declining for decades as families have gotten smaller, kids have moved away. We need to, and it's located within walking distance of downtown. I mean, we need to figure out ways in those neighborhoods to bring people back into them that we love, and that involves providing types of housing that fit for the real sizes of households in our country.
Thank you. Can both of you touch on the environmental aspects of ADU construction, and once folks are living in them, high energy costs are burdensome to everyone, but especially those of lower income. Can you just touch on that for a bit? Because I think that's really important for folks to understand as well.
Yeah,
start with
you want to go ahead, Eli? Because we're having a California building code. That's our
Oh, are you? Okay.
sensitivity. Go ahead.
Well, I'll just give one little stat that got me excited about accessory. If you take a 2,400 square foot house in Portland, which is a mild climate, built to LEED standards, like super energy efficient, that house is a little bit worse for the environment than an 1,800 square foot house built to base code. So you're better off just shrinking the house by 600 square feet than doing all the bells and whistles to get this energy certification. And those are good things to do to your house: an efficient furnace, good insulation, all that stuff. But if you just shrink the house a little bit, that's the better option. And ADUs are naturally small. And in my market, people used to put gas into ADUs. They don't do it almost at all anymore. It's almost all electric. We have pretty good green power. So ADUs just have a much smaller building footprint, carbon footprint, than traditional single family homes. So that's one reason I love them.
In California, we have new, even more rigorous green energy codes. So that forces, yes, the first cost can be intimidating, because we are required to put solar panels on the roof. We have to have the most efficient water and electrical use. We're not allowed to use gas anymore in the new construction. It's all electric. I think on the individual building, but the long term, we're talking about the monthly individual expense over time. Yes, it's beneficial because your monthly bills would be less than if you had a conventional house. But there's a bigger conversation to be had about the community. In-law units, ADUs, are not just being used to live in, they're also being used for commercial ventures. So you work from home, you are not driving, and this is where the pandemic is actually pushing even more need and embracing of in-law units, is more and more companies are saying we're not going to go back to 100% work at the office. Therefore, we will not be driving as much to the offices for a while. So what it means is you're working from home. This is where we're seeing a big increasing demand for in-law units. It was less, the COVID has forced us to look at working from home and needing a special place to work. And so more and more families are looking at building an in-law unit, to deal with this work from home and separation of church from state. and recognizing, oh, if I ever go back to the office, I can rent this unit out, or it can be a cottage industry. So now we're looking at changing the codes to accommodate cottage industry within residential communities. And so I see the impact is driving less, we're spending more in our communities, which is the economic engine around this small, I call it the DNA of communities, because I see it as this is the ultimate green solution for communities, and the reduction of driving to the office and starting to have actually businesses within community, within walking distance, is because we're having small cottage industry back in communities. And we actually have a living example of where this really works. Ashland, Oregon is one of these prime examples where for more than 100 years, they've had ADUs as part of their urban structure. But I've spent like 5 years examining the benefit of this unit. They're being used not just as rental units for residential, but they're also being used as small industry. Graphic designer who can't afford an office space rental will rent an in-law unit because they have their own entry. They're a viable means of either being a private residence or a business. It's also a way for someone who has started a cottage industry to test the waters before they go out on Main Street. So we, for the first time, have a building type that is so flexible, so adaptable, that it works for both residential and commercial. It acts as a training ground, an incubator for if you want to grow your business, or you get married and have a family and move to the bigger house. We have never had this unit type examined as a viable urban model, not just affordable rental or affordable income model. This is where I find the sweet spot for in-law units. So eventually we're going to see it as the DNA for urban survival as well as rural. So that's my take on the sustainable part, is that it's not just the green energy. We have to understand sustainability as this regenerative process. And that's where I see in-law units playing an incredible role.
Perfect, thank you. I'm now going to open it up to our Q&A. We have some questions in the chat and in this Q&A area. So I'm going to try to get to everyone's questions as well. One of the first questions is about size, and both of you, if you would like, can address this. But what sizes of ADUs are you seeing, and what's the most popular?
Well, I think the 400 square footers, those are the ones you can build for a little over $100,000 still. And so those are popular when people are budget constrained, or they're just trying to create somewhere for a relative to live. And then I think that when people have a choice to go up to 800 square feet or even more, and they've got the budget, they usually build up to what their budget allows. I mean, there's the cost per square foot drops the more square feet you build. As you say, in the building industry, drywall and carpet are cheap. So I think you do see 2 and 3 bedroom accessory dwelling units, and you can fit that into 800 square feet. Some communities go to 1,000 square feet, but that's about where it caps out.
Yeah, we're
And
seeing.
I should say some communities are more flexible if you're converting a portion of an existing house, because there's plenty of 2,500 square foot existing houses out there. And I know, at least where I would live, if you can convert the basement to an ADU, even if up to 1,200 square feet, because it's just the footprint of the main house above it.
Yeah, in terms of new construction, detached, my last national survey, the average was around 600 square feet. And then, of course, depending on income, it goes up to as much as 1,200. My focus is much smaller because I see it as kind of the start a home approach. Kind of, I take the Levittown approach, which is to design a small unit that can be expanded. And that is why my design starts with aggregating the water in one location and then build out from there. So what I design is kind of like the nucleus of something that can be expanded later. But on the average, nationally, the number I saw was 600 square feet, 2 bedrooms, really 2 small bedrooms.
Exactly. And then the follow-up to that question was about the stories. Can they have, upstairs, downstairs? June, you mentioned the cottage industry. And I was thinking about, if it was a two-story, perhaps, your business space on the bottom and then your living space up top. But there was a question about,
Yeah, it's dependent on regulated by code. So in California, the maximum height, well, we have a by right law. So in California, by right, anyone can build an in-law unit. We just made that a statewide model. The maximum height is 16 feet. And I think that's the pitch. The 16 feet does not give you two clear stories. So you end up having to dig down. It's a bone of contention for many of us because we don't know who suggested the 16-foot cap. So many of us are quite frankly pissed about it. Because now we're having to excavate to get the full 2 stories. But your local city can allow taller and to have ordinances that allow 2-story. There is no limit there as long as the city decides that it will allow it. Most cities are, the more affluent are allowing, the less affluent are, people are building what they can. So it's really the building code that's the driver. The ordinance, I should say, not the code.
I'm seeing the notes that it's 25 feet in Durham. I'm guessing that's to the peak of the roof. In Portland, it's 18 feet. It was 18 feet. Now it's 20 feet to the midpoint of the gable end. So those are kind of similar in practice. You can get a 1.5-story ADU in either of those models, which I think is a great size. And usually ADUs are capped by the height of the main house also. That's pretty common. I will give one little pitch for the early, I think that June and I are both fans of the small ADUs that are more humble. But I want to give a pitch to the early adopters to build the fancy ones because they're the ones who they've got the big budget. If they discover that they can't hook up the sewer for some reason or the gas, and it costs them $20,000, they can afford that. In some ways, I want as communities legalize ADUs. I think it's fine to have the fancy ones. Otherwise, they'd be building some big old house out on the burbs, and they can be the early adopters, have the pain, and then the affordable housing groups can already have those lessons learned as you start to create less expensive options, because you can't afford to have a $20,000 surprise when you're trying to build an affordable ADU. You'd rather have those mistakes and lessons learned by someone who's got the budget for it.
absolutely. So another question here, are you seeing any conflicts with short-term rentals? I know, Eli, I know you touched on that in your presentation. Some jurisdictions allow them as short-term, some don't. And are you seeing any conflicts out there with that?
It's a big conflict issue as cities try and adopt codes. That's the hot topic. And it's unfortunate. I fully believe cities should regulate short-term rentals. But whether they should specifically call out ADUs to regulate is a little bit questionable. I mean, people use houses, condos, apartments. They use everything for short-term rentals, sheds. I don't know. But why the city would specifically call out accessory dwellings for special regulation is strange. I know that where I live, we actually subsidize accessory dwelling units by not charging impact fees as you build them for water, parks, transportation, which can save you $13,000 off your permit costs. But we did just say recently that if you're going to get that waiver, you have to agree for 10 years not to use it as a short-term rental. And I think that's fair. That's basically saying we're not going to subsidize it for you if it's a short-term rental, but you can still use it for them. You just got to pay the full fee. So that's one approach you could take. But yeah, whenever communities want to regulate accessory dwellings as short-term rentals, I usually say, that's great, but just come up with a short-term rental code that applies to all your housing stock. And then ADUs are just part of the housing stock.
Our experience was a little bit, actually not a little bit, was very much tied to Airbnb. That was a specific driver around the short-term rental discussion. Yes, our ordinance does say an in-law unit, an ADU cannot be rented for less than 30 days. But what was happening, we have to understand the history of that request, which was the Bay Area housing market became so aggressive. What was happening was corporations were buying single family homes, renting them out as Airbnb. Those who had extra rooms were going strictly for quick churn Airbnb. The result was an extreme shortage of housing, affordable housing. And so this was where those who needed to, we needed to do something. It was becoming a new market that didn't exist. The in-law units becoming Airbnb became this new market that's emerged out of nowhere. And that was the pushback against the putting in the restriction. The other reason, the newest reason for reinforcing the restriction is that now corporations are looking to convert those in-law units to corporate apartments, again, taking them off the market as rental units. So I understand, I agree with Eli, regulate across the board, but also understand where some of these requests came in, that in the Bay Area, it was specifically because everyone got into the hoteling business overnight because of Airbnb. And then now corporations are getting into, I'm talking corporations, not hotels, I'm talking the Twitters of the world, are getting into hoteling simply by buying units and wanting to convert them to corporate apartments. So you have to understand the market you're operating in.
And I'll
Absolutely.
jump in. ADUs make good short-term rentals, frankly.
Yes.
So that's one reason people do it, and it helps them pay them off quickly. I have never been that worried about that because people get tired of hosting short-term rentals also. And then they end up saying, I'm sick of that. And then they make it a long-term rental. And during COVID, that happened enormously. Lots of short-term rental ADUs suddenly became long-term housing, which we needed. But I agree with June's point that it depends which market you're in and how much the market is owned with absentee investors who are using it just for cash flow.
Okay, this question is for June. What is the least expensive backyard unit you have seen in Oakland?
Oh my
Could you
goodness.
imagine that one and then the second part of that question is, could you imagine that unit in Durham?
Okay, so I'm not sure what's going on with Durham. Everyone I know has moved, then been appointing to head of School of Architecture, and so I'm not sure what you guys have going on down there, but I haven't been to Durham yet, but I'm going to get there for 2022. The most inexpensive in-law unit I've seen is where someone did it for, I think she said 60,000, but understand. She and her husband did the entire thing themselves. So they did not pay for professional skills to do this. She was an interior designer, so she knew what she wanted to accomplish. So again, she was using her own skill sets to design the unit, and her husband to build. He was not in the construction business, but they were gung-ho. That's the cheapest I've seen. In terms of using professional construction labor, I think the cheapest I saw was 135,000. Again, that's Bay Area dollars, so I don't know what the Durham dollars are. It's like 2 foreign countries. And that was about, I believe it was 350 a square foot, and it was small. It was 335 a square foot. I think it was 350 square feet total. That was the cheapest I've seen. There are others, but it depends on the financing model. So like Habitat might allow a sweat equity model, so that reduces the financial cost. It's not so easy to say what's the least expensive, because people are hacking this in the Bay Area as much as they can. And that's why I promote the high-low method, of which you get community labor involved, because that's going to reduce your financial outlay.
Can I jump in? June did that great map of Oakland showing all these existing structures. I mean, new ADUs are not the inexpensive ADUs. That's the most expensive version. The inexpensive ones are when people convert a garage. There's lots of garages. Those conversions can be $40,000. You know, converting a part of a house you're not using that much, that can be $12,000. I mean, there's some much less expensive versions of ADUs, and they're not as sexy as detached new ADUs, but that's the affordable option.
Absolutely. And I think I'm from New Jersey, and we didn't call them attached ADUs. They were basement apartments, but same concept.
Garden apartment.
Mhm. All right. And the next question is, what is the appetite for creating affordable housing units in suburban neighborhoods versus, downtown neighborhoods with ADUs? Are you seeing anything in the suburbs, any activity?
We see much less activity for ADUs in the suburbs, partly because of two reasons. One is homeowner associations. Oftentimes, homes built since the 70s usually have an HOA draped over them, and sometimes those HOAs have rules saying you can't build any ADUs. And this might be true for a 200 home subdivision. Recent rules in California and Oregon say you can't do that for new developments anymore. But there's lots of legacy subdivisions that prohibit additional structures. And the other reason is that the rents, they just don't rent for as much out in the burbs. So the economics of an ADU don't work out as well. So that's, but the garage conversions is an example. I love to see this, the snout house conversion to a little separate little dwelling out front. I wish that happened more often.
I don't have much suburban experience, but what I'm finding fascinating is the rise in rural conversation around in-law units that I didn't expect, but I understand why. Having another structure on an acre of land brings you income. If you're a farmer, you're susceptible to climate, weather changes, your income's constantly varying. So that cottage becomes another source of income. And I've been approached by at least 2 rural towns to look at their land use models, to look at how this might work for them as well. And some of these rural towns are becoming early retirement locations. And so individuals are looking at, okay, what if I build this second structure as a vacation home for those who are coming to these new away from city experiences. So it's a really fascinating story around where in-law unit conversations are popping up. And I didn't expect it in the rural community at all. And that's where I'm seeing some new conversations.
Can either one of you summarize the fire separation code for carving out an ADU in an existing home? I'm guessing Mark is talking about firewalls and things of that nature.
You want to go, Eli?
Yeah, it's actually in Oregon, at least, and I don't know, I wish I knew my building code world. Single family homes and duplexes are regulated under one set of codes. And then if you go 3 or more homes, then you have to deal with more commercial level fire separation walls. So you don't, if you're just going from 1 unit to 2 units, the interior firewalls, you don't have to do anything new. You can use the existing situation. If you were in a 3-unit building, then suddenly you need to have a 1-hour fire separation between each of those 3 units, which can be a pain in the neck for an existing house. It means you're pulling off all the trim, you're adding a layer of sheetrock. So there's reasons why, even though Portland technically now allows you to have 2 internal ADUs, it's unlikely people are going to do it because that's going to trip them over into the commercial code and have that fire separation issue. But if it's just 1 unit interior, then it's in my experience, it's easy. You're not having to add fire separation.
Yeah, I think it's the same also in the Bay Area. I don't recall needing a fire separation, and typically it's just one J80, we call it the J80U. I don't recall having to put in a 1-hour, just a separate means of exit and its own kitchen and bath.
Okay, I do have a follow-up question for you, June. For your lower priced units, did you use the modular construction setup you were talking about for those, or was that more of the sweat
Yeah,
that was put in there?
no, I understand the question. So I deliberately used the modular approach in designing the product with the intent that we could say, take the wet module, the box, the design, and have, say, Factory OS, which is one of our prefab factories here, have them make the wet unit. The dry unit, can we have an empty warehouse in the community make the walls? And so what I'm doing is trying to find a way to hack the prefab factory, 100% prefab, 100% factory-based production. There are many benefits to that, but so far I haven't seen any price points from a prefab in-law unit, factory built, that makes it affordable, unless they're providing the loan structure, of which I have a problem with that. So what I was trying to do was, okay, I recognize that if I do this thing 100% of the factory and have it shipped to the site, it's not going to meet my target market income. Can I hack this where I get the efficiency around factory production for the wet part of the structure? I know I'm going to have to do site foundation, so that's going to be site work anyway. So the foundation is on site. The wet part of the box is factory built. The rest of it, can I just rent a warehouse space, which is, we have so many empty warehouses, have 10 contractors rent space in it, and all they do is wall production. And then everything comes to the site like a kit of parts, and we put it together. And that's the design. But what I love about the design, what we've done, because we really approached it from trying to understand the delivery of a product to a site, as well as really how much labor do we have out there in the market? Not much. So I'm going to have to find a way of sweet spot, but also recognize that, hey, if someone wants to use traditional construction to build a unit, they also have that ability with the plan set that we've done. So we're trying to meet families where they are and meet the market where it is in the model that we've done. So it could easily be done in a factory.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much for joining us today from Oregon, from California. We are so appreciative that you have taken your time out of your day to share your expertise with us. This has been amazing. I just want to thank you both, Eli and June, for doing that. I also want to our attendees, I want to encourage you to continue the conversation in Hoover's community area, start a virtual meetup, meet some of the other attendees, and of course, share your resources. We have a 15-minute break. And so please come back and join our next session at 2:30. The second session is called West Coast Partnerships in Practice. And we have a few more folks from the West Coast who are going to share how they're working with others, nonprofits and for-profit entities, to really push ADUs as affordable housing. Thank you so much, and we'll see you back at 2:30.
So thanks for having me.
Thank you.